When billionaire CEO Victoria Sterling mocked Marcus Thompson with, "Fix this engine and I'll marry you," she never imagined the black mechanic would expose her company's darkest secrets in seconds. The boardroom of Sterling Automotive Corporation had never witnessed such chaos. Papers scattered across the mahogany table, coffee stains marking expensive documents, and the acrid smell of burnt electronics filling the air. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, the city sprawled endlessly below, oblivious to the corporate meltdown unfolding in the glass tower that pierced the sky like a steel needle. Victoria Sterling stood at the head of the table, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles had turned white. At 28, she had inherited more than just her father's automotive empire. She had inherited his arrogance, his dismissive attitude toward anyone he deemed beneath his social class, and his absolute certainty that money could solve any problem. "This is completely unacceptable." Victoria's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Her tailored business suit, worth more than most people's monthly salary, remained impeccable, despite the chaos surrounding her. "We have the most expensive engineers in the industry, and you're telling me none of you can figure out what's wrong with our flagship engine?" The 12 men seated around the table shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Each wore identical expressions of barely concealed panic. These were some of the most highly paid automotive engineers in the world, graduates from prestigious universities, holders of advanced degrees, and recipients of industry awards. Yet for the past 3 weeks, they had been completely stumped by a problem that threatened to destroy Sterling Automotive's reputation forever. Dr. Richard Steinberg, the head of engineering, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses nervously. His Harvard PhD in mechanical engineering suddenly felt worthless. "Miss Sterling, we've run every diagnostic test imaginable. The engine should work perfectly according to all our calculations, but every prototype fails within minutes of operation. The problem appears to be in the internal combustion sequence, but we can't pinpoint the exact cause." "Should work?" Victoria's eyes flashed dangerously. "Should work doesn't launch products, Dr. Steinberg. Should work doesn't maintain our stock price. Should work certainly doesn't explain to our investors why we're 3 months behind schedule on the most important engine release in our company's history." James Morrison, the company's lead designer, cleared his throat tentatively. "Perhaps we need to bring in external consultants." "There are firms that specialize in—" "External consultants," Victoria interrupted, her voice rising to a pitch that made several engineers wince. "We're already paying you people more money than some country's GDP, and now you want me to admit to the industry that Sterling Automotive can't solve its own engineering problems?" The silence that followed was deafening. 25 years of corporate dominance, millions of dollars in research and development, and the reputation of being the most innovative automotive company in North America, all of it hanging by a thread because of one stubborn engine that refused to cooperate. Thomas Bradley, the company's chief financial officer, spoke up from his position near the window. "Victoria, the board is getting nervous. The investors are asking questions. If we don't resolve this soon, we're looking at potential lawsuits, stock devaluation, and possibly having to recall the preliminary models we've already shipped to dealers. Don't you think I know that?" Victoria spun around to face him, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. "Don't you think I'm aware that everything my father built could collapse because of one engine?" The weight of legacy pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. Charles Sterling had started the company in his garage 40 years ago, building it from nothing into an automotive giant that employed thousands of people and generated billions in revenue. When he died 2 years ago, he had entrusted everything to Victoria, his only child, despite the whispered doubts of the board members who questioned whether someone so young could handle such responsibility. Now, facing the first major crisis of her tenure as CEO, those doubts echoed in her mind like a relentless drumbeat. Dr. Steinberg tried again, his voice carefully modulated to avoid triggering another outburst. "Miss Sterling, perhaps we could approach this from a different angle. Instead of focusing on what's wrong, maybe we could examine similar engines that actually work. There might be a pattern or technique we're overlooking." "Similar engines?" Victoria's laugh was cold and bitter. "Dr. Steinberg, we're Sterling Automotive. We don't copy other people's work. We innovate. We lead. We set the standards that everyone else tries to meet." "Of course, Miss Sterling. I only meant—" "What you meant was that we should lower ourselves to studying inferior products made by our competitors. What you meant was that we should abandon everything that makes us industry leaders and start following instead of leading. The engineers exchanged glances filled with desperation. 3 weeks of 18-hour days, countless tests, computer simulations, and mechanical analyses had yielded nothing. The engine design was theoretically perfect, revolutionary even. It promised better fuel efficiency, lower emissions, and more power than anything currently on the market. But theory and reality had diverged in ways that defied explanation. At that moment, the conference room door opened, and Margaret Chen, Victoria's personal assistant, stepped inside. Margaret had worked for the Sterling family for 15 years, first for Charles and now for Victoria. She possessed the rare ability to remain calm in the midst of any crisis, a skill that had saved the company from numerous public relations disasters. Miss Sterling, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a situation in the main lobby that requires your attention. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Margaret, unless the building is on fire or we're being invaded by aliens, whatever is happening in the lobby can wait. We're dealing with a crisis that could bankrupt the company. I understand, Miss Sterling, but this involves the engine problem. The room fell silent. Every person present turned to stare at Margaret, with expressions ranging from confusion to desperate hope. What do you mean it involves the engine problem? Victoria's voice was dangerously quiet. Margaret consulted her tablet briefly. There's a man in the lobby claiming he can fix the engine. Security called me because he's been quite persistent, and he specifically mentioned details about the combustion sequence failure that haven't been made public. Dr. Steinberg leaned forward in his chair. How could a random person in the lobby know about technical details that we've kept confidential? That's exactly what I intend to find out, Victoria said, her curiosity overriding her irritation. Margaret, have security bring him up. Miss Sterling, he's not exactly what you'd expect. He appears to be a mechanic from one of the local repair shops. His clothes are quite dirty, and he doesn't look like the type of person who typically visits our executive floors. Victoria's expression hardened. A mechanic? A local mechanic thinks he can solve a problem that has stumped 12 of the most brilliant engineers in the industry. That's what he claims, Miss Sterling. Bring him up immediately. I want to see this for myself. Margaret nodded and left the room, leaving behind an atmosphere charged with tension and disbelief. The engineers muttered among themselves, some expressing outrage at the insult to their professional competence, others desperately hoping that perhaps an outside perspective might provide the breakthrough they needed. Victoria paced to the window, staring down at the city below. From this height, people looked like ants, cars like toys, and problems seemed manageable. But she knew that perspective was an illusion. Real problems had weight, consequences, and the power to destroy everything you thought you understood about yourself and your capabilities. 10 minutes later, Margaret returned, followed by a man who looked completely out of place in the pristine corporate environment. Marcus Thompson was 35 years old, though the lines around his eyes and the calluses on his hands suggested someone who had lived through experiences that aged a person beyond their years. His work uniform bore the logo of Eddie's Auto Repair, a small shop in the industrial district that served mostly working-class customers who couldn't afford dealer service rates. Every person in the room stared at Marcus as he entered. His presence created a stark contrast against the polished marble, expensive artwork, and designer furniture that defined the Sterling automotive executive environment. His boots, worn and practical, left faint marks on the pristine floor. His hands, stained with years of engine oil and honest labor, seemed almost offensive in a room where the most manual task anyone performed was signing contracts. Victoria studied him with the same expression she might reserve for examining an unusual insect. You're the mechanic who claims he can solve our engineering problem? Marcus met her gaze directly, showing none of the deference or intimidation that most people displayed when confronted by Victoria Sterling's legendary intensity. Yes, ma'am. I believe I can help you with your engine. Help us? Dr. Steinberg couldn't contain his indignation. Sir, I don't think you understand the complexity of what we're dealing with. This isn't a simple carburetor problem or a loose belt. We're talking about cutting-edge automotive technology that requires years of specialized education to even comprehend. Marcus turned to face the head engineer, his expression remaining calm and respectful. Dr. Steinberg, I understand that you've been working on this problem for 3 weeks. I also understand that your engine fails within minutes because of incomplete combustion in the secondary chamber, which creates a cascade failure that overheats the entire system. The room fell silent. Those technical details had not been shared with anyone outside the engineering team. The specificity of Marcus's knowledge sent a chill through everyone present. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. How do you know those details? That information is classified. Are you some kind of industrial spy? No, ma'am. I know those details because I can hear them. Hear them? James Morrison leaned forward, genuinely confused. What do you mean, hear them? Marcus's voice remained steady and professional. Every engine has a voice, sir. It tells you exactly what's wrong if you know how to listen. Your engine's voice is saying that the timing sequence in the secondary combustion chamber is off by exactly 0.7 seconds, creating incomplete fuel burn and thermal buildup. Dr. Steinberg's face flushed red. That's impossible. Our computer simulations show perfect timing throughout the entire combustion cycle. The timing sequence has been calculated to microsecond precision. Computer simulations can't account for every variable, Dr. Steinberg. Metal expands and contracts with heat. Oil viscosity changes under pressure. Fuel composition varies slightly between batches. The engine adjusts to these variables automatically, but only if the initial timing allows for that flexibility. Victoria listened to this exchange with growing annoyance. The idea that this mechanic, this working-class man with dirty hands and worn clothes, could understand something that had escaped her team of highly educated engineers was not just insulting. It was impossible. She paused, realizing she didn't know his name. Thompson. Marcus Thompson. Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your confidence, but I think you're underestimating the sophistication of what we've created here. This isn't the kind of engine you work on in your neighborhood garage. This is revolutionary technology that represents millions of dollars in research and development. Marcus nodded respectfully. I understand that, Miss Sterling. But engines are engines regardless of how sophisticated they are. The fundamental principles of combustion, compression, and mechanical timing remain the same whether you're working on a 1995 pickup truck or the most advanced prototype in the world. The fundamental principles. Victoria's voice dripped with condescension. Mr. Thompson, our engineers have spent years studying those fundamental principles. They have degrees from the most prestigious universities in the world. They've published papers in scientific journals. They've won awards for their innovations. And you think your experience changing oil in a local garage gives you insights they've missed? The engineers around the table nodded in agreement, their professional pride wounded by the suggestion that their education and expertise might be insufficient. Several exchanged knowing looks that clearly communicated their shared assessment. This mechanic was either delusional or running some kind of elaborate scam. Marcus absorbed their skepticism without defensiveness. Miss Sterling, I'm not trying to diminish anyone's education or experience. I'm just offering to help solve a problem that's costing your company money and time. Help solve? Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Mr. Thompson, even if you could somehow magically identify the problem, which I seriously doubt, what makes you think you could fix something that requires the precision and expertise that only trained engineers possess? Because I've been fixing engines since I was 12 years old, Miss Sterling. My grandfather taught me that every engine has a personality, a way of communicating its needs. Most people ignore that communication because they're focused on what the computers tell them instead of what the engine itself is saying. Dr. Steinberg couldn't contain himself any longer. This is ridiculous. Miss Sterling, we're wasting valuable time listening to folk wisdom and superstition. Engines don't have personalities. They don't communicate. They operate according to precise mechanical and chemical principles that can be calculated, measured, and predicted. Dr. Steinberg is right, added Thomas Bradley. We have real problems to solve and real deadlines to meet. We can't afford to indulge in whatever this is. Victoria studied Marcus carefully, her business instincts warring with her social prejudices. Part of her wanted to dismiss him immediately and return to the serious work of finding a real solution. But another part of her, the part that had inherited her father's ruthless pragmatism, wondered if there might be something worth exploring. Mr. Thompson, she said slowly, let's say, hypothetically, that you actually could identify and fix our engine problem. What would you want in return? Marcus considered the question seriously. I'd want to know that my daughter's future is secure, that she'll have opportunities to go to college, to become whatever she wants to become, regardless of where she comes from or how much money I have. The honesty of his answer caught Victoria off guard. She had expected demands for money, recognition, or career advancement. Instead, this mechanic was thinking about his daughter's education. Your daughter's education is important to you? It's everything to me, Miss Sterling. She's brilliant, smarter than I ever was. She deserves chances that people like me never got. Victoria felt a momentary connection to that sentiment. Her own father had worked tirelessly to ensure she had every possible advantage, every opportunity to succeed. But then she remembered the vast differences in their circumstances, and the moment of understanding faded. Mr. Thompson, I admire your dedication to your daughter's future, but dedication doesn't qualify you to solve complex engineering problems. What you're suggesting is like saying that because you care deeply about medicine, you should be allowed to perform surgery. Miss Sterling, if someone was dying and the trained surgeons couldn't save them, wouldn't you want anyone who might help to at least try? The metaphor hit closer to home than Victoria wanted to admit. Sterling Automotive was dying, slowly but certainly, with each day that passed without a solution to the engine problem. James Morrison spoke up from across the table. Miss Sterling, perhaps we could allow Mr. Thompson to examine the engine. Not to actually work on it, but simply to share his observations. What could it hurt? Dr. Steinberg looked appalled. What could it hurt? Our professional reputations for starters. If word gets out that we're consulting mechanics off the street, we'll become the laughingstock of the entire automotive industry. Victoria weighed the options. Professional pride versus practical results. Reputation versus revenue. The respectability of established procedures versus the possibility of an unexpected solution. Mr. Thompson, she said finally, I'm going to make you an offer. But first, I want you to understand something clearly. I don't believe you can solve this problem. I don't believe your experience with neighborhood car repairs translates to cutting-edge automotive engineering, and I certainly don't believe in mystical engine communication or any other superstitious nonsense. Marcus nodded, accepting her skepticism without argument. However, Victoria continued, I'm willing to let you examine our engine, not because I think you'll succeed, but because I want to prove definitively that some problems require education, expertise, and proper qualifications to solve. She paused, a cold smile playing at the corners of her mouth. In fact, I'm so confident that you'll fail that I'm willing to make a wager. If you can actually fix our engine, and I mean completely fix it so that it runs perfectly without any ongoing problems, I'll personally ensure your daughter receives a full scholarship to any university she wants to attend. The room stirred with interest. Victoria Sterling was known for her competitive nature and her willingness to make dramatic gestures, but this seemed extreme even for her. And if I can't fix it? Marcus asked quietly. Victoria's smile widened. If you can't fix it, you'll publicly acknowledge that your mechanic training is insufficient for serious engineering work. You'll admit that education and proper qualifications matter, and you'll stop spreading the dangerous idea that any person can solve any problem through intuition and good intentions. Dr. Steinberg leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with this arrangement. Several other engineers smiled with anticipation. This would be an excellent object lesson about the importance of proper education and professional training. Actually, Victoria said, her voice taking on a mocking tone that made several people in the room uncomfortable, let me make this even more interesting. Mr. Thompson, you seem so confident in your abilities. If you can fix our engine, I'll do more than just provide your daughter with a scholarship. She stood up and walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of Marcus. The height difference between them was minimal, but her position of authority, her expensive clothes, and her commanding presence created a sense of towering superiority. If you can fix our engine, Mr. Thompson, I'll marry you. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Several engineers gasped audibly. Margaret Chen, still standing near the door, dropped her tablet. Thomas Bradley choked on his coffee. Miss Sterling, Dr. Steinberg said, his voice strained with shock. Surely you're not serious. I'm completely serious, Victoria replied, never taking her eyes off Marcus. I'm so confident that this mechanic cannot solve a problem that has stumped our entire engineering team, that I'm willing to stake my personal life on it. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, understanding the cruelty behind her offer. She wasn't making a genuine wager. She was creating a public humiliation. She was using his hopes for his daughter's future as ammunition for a demonstration designed to reinforce class boundaries and professional hierarchies. "Miss Sterling," he said quietly, "I don't want to marry you. I just want to help solve your engine problem." "Oh, but the marriage proposal is part of the wager now, Mr. Thompson." "You see, I want everyone in this room to understand exactly how confident I am that you will fail. I'm willing to risk something that most people would consider invaluable, my freedom to choose my own spouse, because I know with absolute certainty that you lack the capability to succeed." The cruelty of her position became clear to everyone present. Victoria Sterling was essentially saying that marriage to Marcus Thompson would be such a terrible fate that she could use it as a confident wager, knowing she would never have to pay. Marcus felt the sting of her implication, but he also felt something else: determination. Not just determination to prove her wrong, but determination to show his daughter that competence and character mattered more than social class or educational credentials. "All right, Miss Sterling, I accept your wager." Victoria's eyes flashed with triumph. "Excellent. Margaret, please arrange for Mr. Thompson to be escorted to the engineering lab. I want this demonstration recorded so that everyone can see exactly what happens when unqualified people attempt to solve complex problems." As the group prepared to move to the laboratory, Dr. Steinberg pulled Victoria aside. "Miss Sterling, are you really willing to risk your reputation on what is essentially an elaborate joke? If this goes badly, the board might question your judgment." "Dr. Steinberg, the board will see that I was willing to explore every possible solution, no matter how unlikely. When this mechanic fails, as we both know he will, it will reinforce the importance of proper education and professional training. It will be a valuable lesson for everyone involved." The engineering laboratory occupied an entire floor of the Sterling Automotive Building. It contained millions of dollars worth of testing equipment, computer systems, and precision tools. The failed engine sat in the center of the room like a mechanical altar, surrounded by diagnostic equipment and monitoring devices. Marcus walked slowly around the engine, his experienced eyes taking in details that the sophisticated instruments might miss. The engine itself was beautiful in its complexity, a masterpiece of modern engineering with precision machined components, advanced materials, and innovative design features. "It's a remarkable piece of work," he said honestly. "Whoever designed this understood engines at a very deep level." James Morrison, despite his skepticism, felt a flush of pride. "Thank you. It represents 3 years of intensive development." Marcus continued his examination, occasionally reaching out to touch certain components. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades working with mechanical systems. The engineers watched his every movement, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed hostility. "Dr. Steinberg," Marcus said without looking up from the engine, "your timing calculations are perfect for a static system. But this engine isn't static. When it heats up, the metal expansion creates tiny changes in the timing sequence. Your computer models probably don't account for the specific thermal expansion coefficient of the particular steel alloy used in the secondary combustion chamber." Dr. Steinberg frowned. "Of course we accounted for thermal expansion. We're not amateurs, Mr. Thompson." "I'm sure you accounted for standard thermal expansion," Marcus replied. "But this particular steel alloy has a slightly different expansion rate than the standard specifications. It's probably within acceptable tolerances for most applications, but in a precision system like this, those tiny differences accumulate into significant timing problems." He moved to a specific component deep within the engine. "The solution isn't to change the materials or redesign the system. You just need to adjust the initial timing to compensate for the expansion that occurs during operation." Victoria watched this exchange with growing annoyance. Marcus's explanations sounded plausible, but she remained convinced that he was either guessing or had somehow obtained inside information about their design. "Mr. Thompson," she said coldly, "talking about the problem is one thing. Actually fixing it is something else entirely. Are you ready to put your theories to the test?" Marcus nodded and began examining the tool array available in the laboratory. To everyone's surprise, instead of reaching for the sophisticated electronic diagnostic equipment, he selected a simple mechanical timing tool, something that looked almost primitive compared to the high-tech instruments surrounding it. "You're going to use that?" Dr. Steinberg couldn't hide his incredulity. "Mr. Thompson, we have computer-controlled precision instruments that can measure timing to microsecond accuracy." "Dr. Steinberg, sometimes the old tools work better because they respond to what's actually happening, rather than what the computers think should be happening." Marcus began working on the engine, with movements that were both swift and careful. His hands seemed to know exactly where to go and what to adjust. The engineers gathered around him, watching every action with intense scrutiny. As he worked, Marcus explained what he was doing. "The primary timing is correct, but the secondary chamber is initiating 0.7 seconds too early. When the engine heats up, that early initiation creates incomplete combustion, which generates excess heat, which causes further timing problems. It's a cascade failure that accelerates with each cycle." "That's impossible," Dr. Steinberg insisted. "Our computers show perfect timing throughout the entire sequence." "Your computers are measuring what the system is programmed to do," Marcus replied, making a tiny adjustment to an internal component. "But they're not measuring what the system actually does under operating conditions." Victoria found herself watching Marcus's hands as he worked. There was something hypnotic about the confidence and precision of his movements. These were hands that had spent decades learning the intimate secrets of mechanical systems. Hands that could diagnose problems through touch and sound in ways that no computer could replicate. But she pushed those thoughts aside, reminding herself that this was all an elaborate show. Real engineering required education, training, and proper qualifications. It required understanding the theoretical principles that governed mechanical systems, not just practical experience with simple repairs. After 20 minutes of work, Marcus stepped back from the engine. That should do it. The room fell silent. Everyone stared at the engine, which looked essentially unchanged despite Marcus's ministrations. "That's it?" Victoria asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. 20 minutes of tinkering and you've solved a problem that stumped our entire engineering team for 3 weeks? "Yes, ma'am. The engine should run properly now." Dr. Steinberg moved to the control panel. "Well, let's see what your 20 minutes of tinkering has accomplished." His tone made it clear that he expected immediate and spectacular failure. He initiated the startup sequence. The engine turned over once, twice, 3 times, and then roared to life with a smooth, powerful sound that none of them had heard in weeks. The monitoring equipment showed perfect readings across all systems. The temperature remained stable. The combustion sequence operated flawlessly. The engine ran for 1 minute, then 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, then 20 minutes. Every diagnostic indicator showed optimal performance. Dr. Steinberg stared at the monitoring displays in disbelief. "This is impossible. The readings are perfect. Everything is operating exactly as designed." James Morrison ran additional diagnostic tests, his face growing paler with each perfect result. "I don't understand. The engine is performing better than our most optimistic projections." Victoria stood frozen, watching the monitors display reading after reading of perfect engine performance. This couldn't be happening. A mechanic from a neighborhood garage couldn't have solved in 20 minutes what 12 trained engineers couldn't solve in 3 weeks. "There has to be an explanation," she said, her voice tight with control. "Run every diagnostic test we have. Check everything twice. There has to be something wrong." For the next hour, the engineering team subjected the engine to every conceivable test. They pushed it to maximum performance levels. They simulated extreme operating conditions. They ran stress tests that would destroy most engines. Through it all, Marcus's repair held perfectly. Finally, Dr. Steinberg turned off the engine and faced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, the engine is functioning flawlessly. Mr. Thompson has solved our problem." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria felt the walls of her worldview cracking and crumbling around her. Everything she had believed about education, qualifications, and social hierarchies was being challenged by the undeniable evidence of Marcus Thompson's competence. "Miss Sterling," Marcus said quietly, "about that wager." Victoria's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, anger, and something that might have been fear. "Mr. Thompson, the wager was—" "The wager was that if I fixed your engine, you would marry me," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. "You made that promise in front of witnesses. as a measure of how confident you were that I would fail. But surely you don't expect, Victoria began, then stopped herself. She had made the wager publicly, as a demonstration of her certainty that this mechanic would fail. Now that he had succeeded, backing down would be an admission that she had never intended to honor her word. Miss Sterling, Marcus continued, I told you earlier that I don't want to marry you. I have no desire to force you into an unwanted marriage or to hold you to a wager made in arrogance and contempt. Victoria felt a mixture of relief and something else she couldn't quite identify. Was it disappointment? The idea was absurd. However, Marcus said, I do want you to understand something. Your engine failed not because it was poorly designed, but because it was designed by people who had forgotten how to listen. Your engineers are brilliant, educated, and highly qualified. But they had become so focused on what their computers told them that they stopped paying attention to what the engine was actually doing. He gestured toward the now silent engine. The solution wasn't complex. It didn't require advanced degrees or sophisticated equipment. It just required someone who remembered that machines, like people, don't always behave exactly according to their specifications. Doctor. Steinberg found his voice. Mr. Thompson, I owe you an apology. Your diagnostic skills are extraordinary. I've never seen anyone identify a problem so precisely or implement a solution so effectively. Dr. Steinberg, you don't owe me an apology. You did exactly what your training taught you to do. The problem wasn't with your approach. It was that your approach wasn't sufficient for this particular situation. Marcus turned to face Victoria directly. Miss Sterling, you made your wager because you believed that education and social class determine a person's capabilities. You were willing to risk marriage to a mechanic because you thought such a thing was impossible. Victoria's jaw tightened. Mr. Thompson, I think you're reading too much into a business decision. Am I? You didn't just bet against my technical skills. You bet against my worth as a human being. You used the idea of marrying me as the ultimate expression of your confidence that I would fail. The truth of his words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She had indeed made the wager not just about technical competence, but about fundamental human value. The implicit message had been clear. Marriage to this mechanic would be such a terrible fate that she could confidently use it as a stake, knowing she would never have to pay. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I made a mistake. Yes, you did. You made the mistake of thinking that a person's worth is determined by their education, their social class, or their bank account. You made the mistake of thinking that competence and intelligence are limited to people who look like you and come from backgrounds like yours. Marcus walked to the window and looked down at the city below. Miss Sterling, I've spent my entire adult life being underestimated by people like you. People who assume that because I work with my hands, I can't think with my mind. People who believe that because I didn't go to college, I can't solve complex problems. He turned back to face the room. But here's what you don't understand. Some of the smartest, most capable people in the world never got the chance to go to college. Some of the most innovative solutions come from people who learned to think creatively because they couldn't afford expensive equipment or formal training. Victoria felt something she had rarely experienced in her adult life. Genuine shame. Not embarrassment about a business mistake or social awkwardness, but deep, fundamental shame about her treatment of another human being. Mr. Thompson, she said, struggling to find words that could somehow repair the damage she had done. You're right. I did make assumptions about you based on superficial characteristics. I was wrong to do that. Miss Sterling, apologies are easy to give when you've been caught being wrong. The real question is whether you've learned anything from this experience. Victoria considered his challenge. What had she learned? That her assumptions about education and competence were flawed. That technical problems could sometimes be solved by unconventional approaches. That social class didn't determine intelligence or capability. I've learned, she said slowly, that I need to examine my prejudices more carefully. I've learned that competence can come from unexpected sources. And I've learned that making assumptions about people based on their appearance or background is not just wrong, it's potentially costly. Marcus nodded. Those are important lessons, Miss Sterling. But the real test will be whether you apply them going forward. Thomas Bradley, who had been silent throughout most of this exchange, finally spoke up. Mr. Thompson, the company owes you a significant debt. You've solved a problem that could have bankrupted us. We need to discuss appropriate compensation for your services. Mr. Bradley, I don't want compensation from Sterling Automotive. I want something more valuable than money. Victoria looked at him curiously. What do you want? I want you to create opportunities for people like me. People who have skills and intelligence but lack formal credentials. People who could contribute to your company if given the chance, but who would never be considered because they don't have the right educational background. Marcus gestured toward the engine. This problem existed because your team had become too homogeneous in their thinking. They were all highly educated, all from similar backgrounds, all trained to approach problems in similar ways. That's why they got stuck.
He paused, letting his words sink in. Diversity isn't just about fairness or social justice. It's about effectiveness. Different backgrounds create different perspectives, and different perspectives lead to innovative solutions. Dr. Steinberg was nodding slowly. Mr. Thompson makes an excellent point.
We might have solved this problem weeks ago if we had consulted with people who had different types of experience. Exactly, Marcus said. Miss Sterling, if you really want to honor our wager, don't marry me. Instead, create pathways for talented people who lack traditional credentials. Establish apprenticeship programs. Partner with community colleges. Recognize that intelligence and competence come in many forms. Victoria found herself genuinely considering his proposal. From a business perspective, it made sense. The company had just experienced a costly demonstration of the limitations of relying exclusively on conventional qualifications. Mr. Thompson, what you're suggesting would require significant changes to our hiring practices, our corporate culture, and our relationship with educational institutions. Yes, it would. Change is never easy, especially when it challenges established systems and assumptions. But the alternative is to keep making the same mistakes, to keep missing opportunities because you're not looking in the right places for talent. Victoria walked to the window and stared down at the city. Somewhere down there were people like Marcus Thompson, intelligent, capable, innovative people, who would never be considered for positions at Sterling Automotive because they lacked the proper credentials. How many problems could they solve? How many innovations could they contribute? How much potential was being wasted because of arbitrary barriers and prejudicial assumptions? Mr. Thompson, she said, turning back to face him, you've given me a lot to think about, but I want to ask you something. Why did you come here today? What made you think we would listen to you? Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the building. Miss Sterling, I came here because my daughter asked me to. Your daughter? She's 16 years old and she's already smarter than I am. She reads everything she can find about automotive engineering, even though she knows she probably won't be able to afford college. When she heard about Sterling Automotive's engine problems on the news, she told me I should offer to help. Victoria felt a strange tightness in her chest. And you listened to her? I always listen to her, Miss Sterling. She sees possibilities that I might miss. She believes in a world where people are judged by their capabilities rather than their circumstances. She sounds like a remarkable young woman. She is, and she deserves a world that will give her opportunities to use her talents, regardless of where she comes from or how much money her family has. Victoria made a decision that surprised even herself. Mr. Thompson, I want to meet your daughter. I want to understand what drives her interest in automotive engineering. And I want to explore ways that Sterling Automotive can support students like her. Marcus's expression softened. Miss Sterling, that would mean more to me than any amount of money. But there's something else I want you to understand, Victoria continued. Today has been humbling for me in ways that I'm still processing. You've forced me to confront assumptions and prejudices that I didn't even know I had. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I made that wager about marriage not just because I was confident you would fail, but because I wanted to demonstrate my superiority in the most dramatic way possible. I used the idea of marrying you as an insult, and that was cruel and wrong. Marcus nodded. I understand why you did it, Miss Sterling. People in positions of power sometimes feel the need to reinforce their status by diminishing others. That doesn't excuse it, and it doesn't excuse the broader pattern of behavior that led to that moment. Victoria turned to address the entire room. Everyone here has witnessed something important today. We've seen that our assumptions about competence and qualifications can be wrong. We've seen that effective solutions can come from unexpected sources. And we've seen that diversity of background and experience is not just morally right, It's strategically valuable. Dr. Steinberg spoke up. Miss Sterling, are you saying that we should change our hiring practices? I'm saying that we should examine our hiring practices, our corporate culture, and our definitions of qualifications. I'm saying that we should create opportunities for talented people regardless of their educational background. Thomas Bradley looked concerned. Miss Sterling, such changes could be controversial with the board. There might be questions about maintaining professional standards. Thomas, what professional standards? Today, our professional standards led us to miss an obvious solution for 3 weeks. Today, our professional standards blinded us to expertise that was literally standing in front of us. Victoria felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in years. The real question isn't whether we can afford to change our approach. The question is whether we can afford not to change. Marcus watched this exchange with growing hope. Change was possible, but only if it came from genuine understanding, rather than temporary embarrassment. Miss Sterling, he said, change is difficult because it requires admitting that previous approaches were flawed. It requires acknowledging that other people might have valuable insights. It requires humility. Yes, it does. And humility has never been my strong suit. But humility can be learned, just like any other skill. Victoria looked at Marcus with new respect. This man, whom she had dismissed and mocked just hours earlier, was teaching her lessons about leadership, perspective, and human value that her expensive business education had never covered. Mr. Thompson, I have a proposition for you. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I hope it's not another wager. Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown all day. No more wagers. I'm proposing something different. I want you to work with us, not as an employee, but as a consultant. I want you to help us identify blind spots in our engineering process. I want you to help us create pathways for non-traditional talent. And I want you to help us remember that engineering is not just about calculations and computer models. It's about understanding machines as living systems that respond to variables that can't always be quantified. Marcus considered the offer carefully. Miss Sterling, I appreciate the proposal, but I need to be clear about something. I won't be a token diversity hire or a publicity stunt. If you want my help, it has to be because you genuinely value the perspective I can provide. Mr. Thompson, after what I've witnessed today, I can assure you that my interest in your perspective is entirely genuine. Dr. Steinberg stepped forward. Mr. Thompson, I would welcome the opportunity to work with you. Today has taught me that my education, while valuable, is not sufficient for every situation. I could learn from your approach. Other engineers around the room began nodding in agreement. The initial hostility and skepticism had been replaced by curiosity and respect. Marcus felt a warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in his adult life, his expertise was being genuinely valued by people whose approval he had never thought possible. Miss Sterling, I accept your proposition, but I have some conditions. What conditions? First, any programs we create have to be accessible to people from all backgrounds, not just those who already have some advantages. Second, the focus has to be on identifying and developing talent, not on meeting diversity quotas. And third, my daughter gets to be involved in designing these programs. Victoria extended her hand. Mr. Thompson, we have a deal. As they shook hands, Victoria realized that this moment represented more than just a business agreement. It represented a fundamental shift in how she understood competence, value, and human potential. Mr. Thompson, there's one more thing I want to say. Yes? Earlier today, I made that wager about marriage because I thought it was impossible that you could succeed. I was wrong about your capabilities, and I was wrong to use marriage to you as a symbol of failure. Victoria paused, gathering courage for what she was about to say. The truth is, after watching you work today, after seeing your competence, your integrity, and your dignity in the face of my disrespect, I realized that any woman would be fortunate to marry someone like you. Marcus looked at her with surprise. Miss Sterling, that's very kind of you to say. It's not kindness, Mr. Thompson. It's honesty. I've learned something important today about looking beyond surface appearances and recognizing real worth. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the significance of this moment. Victoria Sterling, one of the most powerful and privileged people in the city, was publicly acknowledging that she had misjudged someone based on prejudice and superficial assumptions. Miss Sterling, Marcus said gently, I think this is the beginning of important changes for both of us. I hope so, Mr. Thompson. I genuinely hope so. As the group prepared to leave the laboratory, Dr. Steinberg approached Marcus privately. Mr. Thompson, I owe you a personal apology. I was condescending and dismissive, and that was unprofessional and wrong. Dr. Steinberg, we all make assumptions based on our experiences. The important thing is being willing to revise those assumptions when we encounter new information. You're very gracious. I hope we can work together effectively going forward. I'm looking forward to it, Dr. Steinberg. I think we can learn from each other. 6 months later, Sterling Automotive had launched the most successful product introduction in company history. The engine that Marcus had repaired became the centerpiece of a new vehicle line that exceeded all sales projections. More importantly, the company had established the Sterling Innovation Partnership Program, which created pathways for talented individuals regardless of their educational background. The program partnered with community colleges, trade schools, and local businesses to identify and develop unconventional talent. Marcus's daughter, Elena Thompson, became the first recipient of the Sterling Future Engineers Scholarship, a program that supported promising students who demonstrated exceptional aptitude regardless of their family's financial circumstances. Victoria Sterling found herself changed in ways she hadn't expected. The experience of being wrong so dramatically and publicly had forced her to examine not just her business practices, but her fundamental assumptions about people and society. She began spending time in parts of the city she had never visited, talking to people whose experiences were completely different from her own. She discovered reservoirs of talent, creativity, and innovation in places she had never thought to look. The Sterling Innovation Partnership Program became a model for other companies, demonstrating that diversity of background and experience was not just socially responsible but strategically valuable. Marcus continued working at Eddie's Auto Repair, but he also consulted regularly with Sterling Automotive and other companies that sought his expertise in diagnosing complex mechanical problems. His reputation spread throughout the industry as someone who could solve problems that stumped traditional engineers. But the most important change was in the relationship between Marcus and Elena. She had always been proud of her father's skills, but now she saw that the world was beginning to recognize his value as well. "Dad," she said one evening as they worked together in their small garage, "you changed more than just that engine. You changed how people think about what's possible." Marcus smiled as he watched his daughter work on a mechanical project of her own design. "Elena, I didn't change anything. I just reminded people of something they had forgotten, that talent and intelligence come in many forms, and that recognizing that diversity makes everyone stronger." Elena looked up from her work. "Dad, I want to study mechanical engineering in college, but I also want to study social systems and organizational behavior. I want to understand how to create environments where people like you get recognized and valued from the beginning." "That sounds like an important mission, Elena. I learned it from watching you. You showed me that changing one engine can change an entire company, and changing one company can change an entire industry." Marcus felt a pride deeper than any he had ever experienced. His daughter was not just intelligent and talented, she was committed to using her abilities to create opportunities for others. A year after the engine incident, Victoria Sterling stood before a congressional committee that was investigating barriers to economic mobility and innovation in American industry. "Senator Rodriguez," she said, addressing the committee chair, "our experience at Sterling Automotive taught us that traditional credentialism can blind us to exceptional talent. We discovered that some of our most innovative solutions came from people who would never have been considered under our previous hiring practices." Ms. Sterling, can you give us specific examples of how this has impacted your business results? Senator, since implementing our Innovation Partnership Program, we've reduced engineering problem-solving time by an average of 30%. We've increased patent applications by 50%. And we've improved employee satisfaction and retention across all levels of our organization. She paused to let those statistics sink in. But more importantly, we've discovered that diversity of background and experience doesn't just help us solve individual problems. It helps us ask better questions and identify opportunities we might otherwise miss. What advice would you give to other business leaders who might be considering similar programs? Victoria thought about Marcus Thompson, about his quiet dignity in the face of her disrespect, about his focus on his daughter's future rather than his own recognition. Senator, I would tell them that talent is distributed much more broadly than opportunity. Every day we miss chances to solve problems and create innovations because we're not looking in the right places for expertise. I would tell them that changing their approach to talent recognition is not just the right thing to do morally, it's the smart thing to do strategically. After her testimony, Victoria drove to Eddie's Auto Repair, where she found Marcus working on a hybrid engine with Elena. The small garage had been expanded and modernized, but it retained the character and warmth that reflected Marcus's values. "Victoria," Marcus said, wiping his hands on a cloth, "how did the testimony go?" "I think it went well. I tried to explain what you taught me about recognizing talent in unexpected places." Elena looked up from the engine. "Miss Sterling, Dad told me about that day when you made the wager. He said you were brave enough to admit when you were wrong." Victoria felt the familiar warmth of humility. "Elena, I was wrong about many things, but the most important thing I learned was to question my assumptions about people and their capabilities." "Miss Sterling," Elena said, "I'm starting college next month. I wanted to thank you for the scholarship. But more than that, I wanted to thank you for giving my dad the respect he deserved. Elena, your father earned that respect through his competence and character. I just finally learned to recognize it." Marcus smiled as he watched the interaction between Victoria and Elena. The transformation in Victoria had been genuine and lasting. She had not just changed her business practices, she had changed her understanding of human value and potential. "Victoria," Marcus said, "Elena has been working on a project that might interest you. Show her what you've been developing." Elena led them to a workbench where she had been designing a new type of engine diagnostic system. "It's a hybrid approach that combines computer analysis with the kind of sensory assessment that Dad taught me. The idea is to create tools that enhance human intuition rather than replacing it." Victoria examined Elena's work with genuine admiration. The design was sophisticated, innovative, and elegant. "This is remarkable, Elena. Have you considered patenting this design?" "Actually, I want to open source it. I want other people to be able to build on the idea and improve it. Dad taught me that knowledge becomes more valuable when it's shared, not when it's hoarded." Victoria felt a complex mixture of emotions. Elena's approach challenged everything Victoria had been taught about intellectual property and competitive advantage. But it also embodied principles of collaboration and shared benefit that were creating remarkable results. "Elena, I think your approach could revolutionize how we think about innovation and knowledge sharing. Miss Sterling, that's the goal. I want to create systems that recognize and develop talent wherever it exists, not just in traditional institutions." As Victoria drove home that evening, she reflected on the journey that had begun with her cruel wager about marriage. That moment of arrogance and prejudice had catalyzed changes that transformed not just her company, but her understanding of leadership, innovation, and human potential. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Victoria, Elena wanted me to tell you that she's naming her diagnostic system the Stirling-Thompson Engine Intelligence Protocol. She said it represents the collaboration between traditional engineering and intuitive assessment." Victoria smiled as she read the message. The hyphenated name represented something more than just a technical collaboration. It represented the bridging of different worlds, different approaches to knowledge, and different definitions of expertise. 2 years after the engine incident, Marcus Thompson was invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Conference of Automotive Engineers. Standing before an audience of hundreds of highly educated professionals, he felt the weight of representing not just his own experience, but the experiences of countless talented people whose contributions had been overlooked or undervalued. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I stand before you today not as someone who knows more than you do, but as someone who knows differently than you do." The audience listened with respectful attention as Marcus shared his perspective on engineering, problem-solving, and the value of diverse approaches to technical challenges. "Education is invaluable," he said, "but education alone is not sufficient. Experience is crucial, but experience alone is not enough. The most effective solutions emerge when we combine multiple types of knowledge, multiple perspectives, and multiple approaches to understanding complex systems." He gestured toward the audience. "Each of you brings unique insights based on your education, your experience, and your background. But imagine what becomes possible when we also include insights from people whose knowledge comes from different sources. During the question and answer session, a young engineer asked, "Mr. Thompson, what advice would you give to students who are entering the field but don't come from traditional backgrounds?" Marcus thought about Elena, about Victoria, about all the young people who had benefited from the programs they had created together. "I would tell them that their different background is not a disadvantage. It's a potential advantage. They see things that others might miss because they approach problems from different angles. But I would also tell them that they need to be prepared to prove themselves, sometimes repeatedly. Change is slow, and there will always be people who doubt your capabilities based on superficial characteristics." Another engineer asked, "How can those of us in traditional roles better recognize and utilize non-traditional talent?" Start by questioning your assumptions about what qualifications are actually necessary for different tasks. Ask yourself whether the requirements you've established are based on genuine needs or on convention and prejudice. Listen more than you talk. Some of the best insights come from people who see your problems with fresh eyes. And remember that diversity is not about charity or social justice, although those are important. Diversity is about effectiveness. Different perspectives lead to better solutions. After his speech, Marcus was approached by dozens of engineers who wanted to discuss opportunities for collaboration and partnership. Many shared stories of their own experiences with overlooked talent or missed opportunities. A senior engineer from a major automotive company said, "Mr. Thompson, your presentation has convinced me that we need to revise our hiring practices. Would you be willing to consult with us on creating more inclusive pathways for talent recognition?" "I'd be honored to help," Marcus replied. "But I want you to understand that real change requires commitment beyond hiring practices. It requires cultural change, changes in how problems are approached, and changes in how different types of expertise are valued." That evening, Victoria Sterling hosted a celebration dinner for Marcus, Elena, and the key people who had contributed to the transformation of Sterling Automotive. The restaurant overlooked the city, and Victoria found herself thinking about all the talent and potential that existed in the buildings and neighborhoods spread out below them. "Marcus," she said, raising her glass, 2 years ago, I made a wager that I was certain I would win. I was wrong about the outcome, but I was even more wrong about what was really at stake." She paused, looking around the table at the faces of people who had become genuine friends and collaborators. "I thought I was wagering on technical competence, but I was actually wagering on human value. I thought I was demonstrating superiority, but I was actually revealing my own limitations. The real winner of that wager wasn't Marcus, although he certainly proved his point. The real winner was all of us, because we learned that recognizing and valuing different types of talent makes everyone stronger." Elena, now finishing her first year of college, spoke up. "Miss Sterling, I've been thinking about that day when Dad fixed your engine. You offered to marry him if he succeeded, but what you were really offering was respect." Victoria looked at Elena with curiosity. "What do you mean?" "You made marriage the stakes because you thought it was impossible that Dad could succeed. But when he did succeed, you didn't just honor the technical aspect of the wager. You started treating him with the respect he had always deserved." Elena smiled. In a way, the marriage proposal was symbolic of something deeper, the willingness to see people as equals, regardless of their background or circumstances. Marcus felt a surge of pride in his daughter's insight. She had understood something about that day that perhaps none of them had fully articulated. "Elena makes an important point," Victoria said. "Marriage is about partnership between equals. When I made that wager, I was denying Marcus's equality. When I honored his success, I was finally acknowledging it. But the real partnership that emerged wasn't romantic. It was professional and educational. We became partners in changing how talent is recognized and developed." Marcus raised his own glass. "Victoria, you taught me something important that day too. You taught me that people can change, that prejudices can be overcome, and that genuine respect can develop even from hostile beginnings. You showed me that confronting our own prejudices, while painful, can lead to growth and understanding that benefits everyone involved." As the evening progressed, the conversation turned to future plans and ongoing projects. Elena shared her latest designs for diagnostic tools that could be used by people with various levels of technical training. Victoria discussed expansion of the Innovation Partnership Program to other industries. Marcus talked about his work with community colleges to create practical engineering curricula. You know, Victoria said thoughtfully, that original wager was supposed to demonstrate that some problems require formal education and proper qualifications to solve. In a way, it did demonstrate that, just not in the way I expected. Marcus looked at her curiously. What do you mean? The real problem wasn't the engine. The real problem was my narrow understanding of competence and value. Solving that problem did require education, just not the kind I thought. It required learning to recognize talent in unexpected places. It required learning to value different types of expertise. It required learning to question assumptions and remain open to new information. Elena leaned forward. Miss Sterling, are you saying that Dad educated you? Victoria smiled. Elena, your father taught me some of the most important lessons I've ever learned about leadership, problem solving, and human potential. Those weren't lessons I could have learned in any business school. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Marcus pulled Victoria aside for a private conversation. Victoria, I want you to know that what happened between us changed my life in ways that go far beyond business success or professional recognition. What do you mean? For most of my adult life, I accepted that people like me weren't supposed to be recognized or valued by people like you. I internalized the idea that my lack of formal education limited my worth and my potential contributions. Marcus paused, gathering his thoughts. When you made that wager, when you mocked the idea of marrying me, it hurt. But when you honored my success and began treating me with genuine respect, it changed how I saw myself. Marcus, I'm sorry for the hurt I caused, but I'm grateful for what you taught me about recognizing value in unexpected places. Victoria, the point I'm trying to make is that respect is transformative. When you began respecting my expertise, I began believing more fully in my own capabilities. That confidence enabled me to take on challenges I might have avoided before. Victoria felt the weight of his words. Are you saying that my recognition of your abilities helped you recognize them more fully yourself? Exactly. And I think the same thing happened to you. When you admitted that your assumptions were wrong, when you allowed yourself to learn from someone you had dismissed, it freed you to become a better leader. The most important partnerships are those that enable everyone involved to become more than they were individually. Victoria extended her hand to Marcus. Partners? Partners, Marcus agreed, shaking her hand firmly. 5 years after the engine incident, Elena Thompson graduated summa cum laude from MIT with degrees in mechanical engineering and organizational psychology. Her undergraduate thesis, Inclusive Innovation, Recognizing and Developing Non-Traditional Technical Talent, became required reading in several business schools. Victoria Sterling was invited to deliver the commencement address at Elena's graduation ceremony. Standing before thousands of graduates and their families, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Graduates, she began, you are entering a world that will try to convince you that credentials and formal qualifications are the only measures of competence and value. I'm here to tell you that while education is tremendously important, it is not the only source of wisdom, insight, or problem-solving ability. She looked out over the audience, knowing that Marcus and Elena were somewhere in the crowd. 5 years ago, I learned this lesson in the most humbling way possible. I discovered that someone I had dismissed and mocked possessed exactly the expertise my company needed to solve a critical problem. That experience taught me that talent is distributed much more broadly than opportunity, and that recognizing this fact is not just morally right, it's strategically essential. Victoria gestured toward the graduates. You have been given tremendous educational opportunities, and with those opportunities comes the responsibility to recognize and create opportunities for others. The most innovative solutions, the most creative breakthroughs, and the most sustainable progress happen when people from different backgrounds, with different types of knowledge, work together toward common goals. After the ceremony, Victoria found Marcus and Elena among the celebrating families. Elena's face glowed with pride and excitement, while Marcus beamed with the quiet satisfaction of a parent whose sacrifices had enabled his child's success. Congratulations, Elena, Victoria said, embracing the young woman who had become like a daughter to her. Your parents must be incredibly proud. Thank you, Miss Sterling. I couldn't have done any of this without the opportunities you and Dad created together. Elena paused, her expression becoming more serious. "Miss Sterling, I want you to know that watching you change, watching you learn to value different types of knowledge and expertise, taught me something important about leadership." "What did it teach you?" "It taught me that the best leaders are those who remain open to learning from anyone, regardless of their background or circumstances. You showed me that admitting you were wrong and learning from that experience is a sign of strength, not weakness." Victoria felt tears gathering in her eyes. "Elena, you and your father taught me that the most important education happens when we're willing to have our assumptions challenged and our perspectives expanded." Marcus stepped forward. "Victoria, I have something for you." He handed her a small, wrapped package. Victoria opened it to find a simple metal tool, the same type of timing adjustment tool that Marcus had used to fix the Sterling automotive engine 5 years earlier. "Marcus, this is beautiful, but I don't understand." "Victoria, that tool represents the idea that sometimes the simplest approaches are the most effective. But more than that, it represents the value of different types of knowledge and expertise." He smiled. "I want you to keep it as a reminder that innovation and problem-solving come from unexpected places, and that the most valuable partnerships are those that combine different strengths and perspectives." Victoria held the tool carefully, understanding its symbolic significance. "Marcus, I'll treasure this, and I'll remember what it represents about recognizing value in unexpected places." Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a small device. "Miss Sterling, I have something for you too. This is the prototype of the diagnostic system I've been developing. It's designed to combine computer analysis with human intuition in the way that Dad taught me." She handed the device to Victoria. "I want you to have the first working model because you were willing to learn from Dad, and because you created opportunities for people like me to develop our ideas." Victoria examined the elegant device, marveling at its sophisticated design and intuitive interface. "Elena, this is remarkable. Have you decided what you want to do after graduation?" "Actually, I've been accepted to several graduate programs, but I'm considering a different path. I want to start a company that creates diagnostic tools for people with different types of technical training." Elena's excitement was infectious. "The idea is to develop technology that enhances human expertise rather than replacing it, and to make those tools accessible to people regardless of their formal educational background." Victoria felt a familiar stirring of excitement. "Elena, that sounds like exactly the kind of innovation the world needs. Have you thought about funding and business development?" "Actually, I was hoping I could talk to you about that. I know you've developed expertise in supporting non-traditional innovations." Marcus watched this exchange with deep satisfaction. His daughter was about to embark on a career that would extend and amplify the changes that had begun with a simple engine repair 5 years earlier. "Elena," Victoria said, "I would be honored to help you develop this company. But I want to propose something more than just financial support." "What do you have in mind?" "I want to propose a true partnership. Sterling Automotive has resources, distribution networks, and industry connections. You have innovative technology and fresh perspectives on how to make that technology accessible." Victoria paused, organizing her thoughts. "Together, we could create something that changes how technical problems are approached across multiple industries." Elena looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. "Miss Sterling, I accept your partnership proposal, but I have one condition." "What condition?" "I want Dad to be our chief technical advisor. His perspective on practical problem-solving is what inspired this technology in the first place." Marcus felt a warmth spreading through his chest. His daughter was not just succeeding, she was creating opportunities for him to continue contributing to innovations that could benefit others. "Elena, Victoria, I would be honored to work with both of you on this project." As the three of them walked across the MIT campus, Victoria reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. What had begun as a moment of arrogance and prejudice had evolved into a partnership that was creating genuine opportunities for positive change. "Marcus, Elena," she said, 5 years ago, I made a wager that I was certain I would win. I was completely wrong about the outcome, but I was even more wrong about what was really important. I thought I was demonstrating the importance of formal education and proper qualifications. Instead, I learned about the value of different types of knowledge and the importance of remaining open to learning from unexpected sources. Elena linked arms with both Victoria and her father. "You know what I think is most important about that day?" "What?" Victoria asked. I think the most important thing is that everyone involved was willing to change. Dad was willing to take a risk by offering to help. You were willing to admit when you were wrong, and everyone was willing to learn from the experience. Marcus nodded. Elena's right. Change is only possible when people are willing to question their assumptions and remain open to new information. And the most sustainable change happens when it benefits everyone involved, not just some people at the expense of others. Victoria felt a deep sense of gratitude for the experiences that had brought her to this point. You know, that original wager was supposed to prove that some problems require specific qualifications to solve. In a way, it did prove that. How so? Marcus asked. It proved that the problem of prejudice and narrow thinking requires very specific qualifications to solve: humility, openness to learning, and willingness to admit when you're wrong. Those aren't qualifications you can get from a university or a professional certification. They're qualifications you develop through experience, reflection, and genuine engagement with people whose perspectives differ from your own. As they reached the parking area, Elena turned to face both Victoria and her father. I want to say something that I've been thinking about throughout college. What is it, Elena? Marcus asked. I think that day when you fixed the engine, when Miss Sterling made her wager, was really about more than just technical problem solving. It was about proving that people deserve to be judged by their capabilities rather than their circumstances. Elena's voice grew stronger with conviction. But the most important thing that happened wasn't Dad proving his competence. The most important thing was Miss Sterling learning to recognize that competence. Because talent without recognition remains invisible. Innovation without opportunity remains potential. And progress without inclusion remains limited. Victoria felt the truth of Elena's words resonate deeply. Elena, you've articulated something that I've been struggling to understand for 5 years. The real transformation wasn't in solving the engine problem. It was in learning to see value where I had been blind to it before. Marcus put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Elena, you've understood something that it took me decades to learn. The most important changes happen when people become willing to see each other differently. As they prepared to part ways, Victoria made one final observation. You know, that wager I made 5 years ago was supposed to be impossible for Marcus to win. But looking back, I realized that everyone won. Marcus won recognition for his expertise. Elena won opportunities for her education and career. Sterling Automotive won solutions to complex problems and access to innovative talent. And I won an education about leadership, humility, and human potential that was more valuable than anything I learned in business school. Marcus extended his hand to Victoria one final time. Victoria, thank you for being willing to admit when you were wrong, and for having the courage to change. Marcus, thank you for being patient with my ignorance, and for teaching me to recognize value in unexpected places. Elena hugged both of them. Thank you both for showing me that the most important partnerships are those that enable everyone involved to become more than they could be alone. As Victoria drove home that evening, she thought about the distance they had all traveled from that day in the Sterling Automotive boardroom, when she had mocked a mechanic's offer to help solve an engineering problem. The changes that had emerged from that encounter had transformed not just their individual lives, but the lives of hundreds of other people who had benefited from more inclusive approaches to talent recognition and development. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that prejudice and narrow thinking could be overcome, that people could learn to value different types of expertise, and that genuine partnerships could emerge even from hostile beginnings. The wager Victoria had made 5 years earlier was supposed to prove that Marcus Thompson couldn't solve a problem that required education and expertise. Instead, it had proved that the most important problems, the problems of prejudice, exclusion, and wasted human potential, could only be solved through education of a different kind. Education in humility, education in recognizing value in unexpected places, education in the understanding that talent and intelligence come in many forms, and that a society's strength lies in its ability to recognize and develop all of those forms. As Victoria pulled into her driveway, she realized that Marcus Thompson had indeed won their wager. Not because he had fixed an engine, but because he had fixed something much more important, a world view that had limited everyone's potential for growth, learning, and meaningful partnership.